Nix, and I'm with the Communications Branch of the Executive Council Office. Thank you for joining us this morning. I respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin-Dun First Nation and the Ta'an-Quechan Council. I also respectfully acknowledge that the heap leach failure at the Eagle Gold Mine took place on the traditional territory of the First Nation of Natchoniak-Dun, with catastrophic impacts to the environment that are still being remediated. This is a media technical briefing on the remediation work and environmental monitoring underway. Our aim is to give you an update on what's new since our last briefing. If we aren't able to answer your questions today, please let me know and we'll do our best to follow up. I'd like to introduce our speakers first. First, we'll hear from Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources, John Stryker. Next, we'll hear from Aaron Dowd, Director of Technical Services for Energy, Mines and Resources, and then Tyler Williams, a Water Resource Specialist with the Department of Environment. Each speaker will offer introductory comments before we open the floor to questions. And now to Minister Stryker.
Thanks, Myra. Good morning, everybody. Like you, I want to begin by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of the Kwanlin-Dun First Nation and the Ta'an-Quechan Council. And this is likely to be the last technical briefing on the Eagle Gold Mine before we get to an election. So just want to make sure that we can answer as many questions as possible right now. And again, like you, Myra, I want to acknowledge that the catastrophic heap leach failure happened on the traditional territory of the First Nation of the Natchoniak-Dun. It's an important moment, not just to look at what's happened, but to reflect on the lessons we've learned and the steps we're taking to move forward. So let's begin with findings of the Independent Review Board from their report. As you recall, the Independent Review Board was established to investigate the heap leach failure at the mine. The Independent Review Board's mandate was to assess the technical causes of the incident and provide recommendations to prevent future occurrences. The Independent Review Board identified a number of areas for improvement at Eagle, including design, operations, and regulatory oversight, and recommended steps to strengthen safety, training, accountability, and communication with communities. We've carefully reviewed the report provided by the Independent Review Board, tasked with examining the causes of the heap leach failure at the Eagle Gold Mine. And we believe that the recommendations of the board are strong and have begun work to implement all of them. Since the Independent Review Board released its recommendations, we've been busy identifying what's already in progress, what needs updating, and what new actions we need to start. In terms of immediate actions, we're already in the process of reviewing all existing and pending quartz mine licenses to see how they align with the Review Board's recommendations. And we're notifying license holders so the recommendations can be integrated into ongoing and planned operations. We agree with the Independent Review Board that a review of the guidelines for mine waste management facilities is warranted and have begun this review. The Yukon government will work with the Council of Yukon First Nations and the Yukon Chamber of Mines on this review process. As well, we have also begun work to retain subject matter experts to help improve our regulatory and enforcement oversight. We're also increasing training of staff in response to the recommendations. Taking these steps quickly is an important part of rebuilding trust in the Yukon's mining industry. What happened at Eagle Gold, along with other issues in our mining sector, have made it painfully clear we can't afford to get this wrong. The stakes are too high. Our environment, our communities, and the Yukon way of life are all at risk. I'd be remiss if I didn't, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Yukon's new minerals legislation. Preventing another failure means using every tool available to us, acting on the Independent Review Board's recommendations, updating our mining laws, and taking steps to strengthen oversight and safety across the sector. This legislation has been years in the making with Yukon First Nations and transboundary Indigenous governments, building on knowledge, experience, and collaboration of First Nations, industry, and environmental groups. While a framework may not be finalized before the election, or the writ drops, I'm confident that whoever takes on this role next, regardless of political stripe, will need to continue this important work and build on the progress we've already made. We all agree that we need to update our legislation to reflect modern-day treaties, to protect our environment, and to ensure a sustainable, responsible mining sector. The Yukon's future is counting on it. Before we move to Aaron and Tyler for the technical update, I want to take a moment to reflect, especially since this might be my last appearance at one of these briefings as Yukon's Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources. I've had the privilege of working with so many incredible people on this file. First of all, to the public servants across multiple departments, including Environment, EMR, Compliance Monitoring Inspection, who have all gone above and beyond. Thank you. First Nation governments and partners sharing their knowledge, experience, and guidance, including in particular staff and technical experts from the First Nation of Notchanaik-Dun, working tirelessly this past year and a half now on the heap leach failure. The court-appointed receiver, PricewaterhouseCoopers, who got us through freshet, and right as that was happening, made the time to meet with opposition MLAs and appear as witnesses in our assembly. Contractors and businesses on site, including Victoria Gold employees who stayed on to help when it mattered most. And finally, thank you to the local media who've kept the public informed and asked the tough questions we all need to hear. While the catastrophe has been heartbreaking and an intense amount of work, it's also been truly inspiring to see people from every field of expertise rally together to respond to the crisis and help chart a path forward. Your work has made a big difference in the face of the disaster. Taking these steps quickly is an important part of rebuilding trust in the Yukon's mining industry and making sure that the environment is protected. What happened at Eagle Gold, along with other issues in our mining sector, have made it very clear we can't afford to get this wrong. The stakes are too high. Our environment, our communities, and the Yukon way of life would all be threatened. Oh, sorry, folks. I flipped the page and went back to where I was reading. I was wondering why I was saying the same thing. So here I go. Your work has made a big difference in the face of the disaster. Since June 24th, 2024, and even before, with Minto and other past incidents, our lives have been changed by these events. They remind us every day that we have to get this right. Every decision matters and every action counts. The work we're doing now is about giving Yukoners confidence in our regulatory system and protecting our lands, waters, and communities. We're acting on all of the Independent Review Board's recommendations and strengthening oversight for the future. I'm proud of the progress that has been made, although I recognize there remains much important work in front of us. I know the foundations being laid today will guide responsible resource development in the Yukon for years to come. With that, I'll turn it over to our technical teams for a site update and next steps. Thank you. Merci. Masicho Ganoshish.
Thank you, Minister Stryker. We'll now hear from Aaron Dowd.
Good morning, everyone. Like I said, we'll be giving an update on all of the work that the PricewaterhouseCoopers, the court-appointed receiver, has undertaken on site over the past year. A significant portion of the response efforts undertaken have been on the management and treatment of water on site. And we've got a few slides here just to show some pictures of what's been happening. There we go. So regarding water management, the receiver has constructed 6 water storage ponds, 31 groundwater wells, 7 collection sumps, and a significant water conveyance network. This work is critical to the response efforts as it allows for the interception of contaminated water sources and directs these sources to storage areas for treatment prior to release. So this slide just shows the overall layout of the site, and you can see how far the ponds are apart. In the upper left-hand corner, that's the heap leach facility, and you can see the events pond and the control pond that are immediately down gradient of that facility, and then as well the the newly constructed ponds that you can see on the upper right-hand side. There's 3 ponds you can see there, and then 2 ponds down in the valley. But through these efforts, the receiver has intercepted more than 350,000 cubic meters of groundwater and has increased water storage capacities by 500,000 cubic meters. The receiver is installing additional groundwater wells to improve the interception system on site and is currently repairing a water storage pond that was previously leaking and requires repair prior to future use. These activities will improve the water management capabilities on site and further reduce impacts to the surrounding environment. So on the slide here, you can see on the upper left-hand side is an example of a collection sump, as well on the upper right-hand side. Those are 2 collection sumps that are collecting water to then be relayed to storage locations. The bottom left-hand corner is the pond that is currently under repair, and then the other 2 ponds are what we call the pit ponds. The receiver has also taken several actions to improve water treatment operations on site. This has included upgrading the existing water treatment plant, installing a separate treatment system for contact water, and they've begun the in situ treatment of water using biological methods. So on the left-hand side here is the water treatment plant, along with the 2 ponds that were constructed to assist in that water treatment. And then on the upper left-hand corner is the Irosa 1 pond, where the treatment for contact water is occurring. And in the bottom there is the pond where the biological treatment is occurring. These efforts have enabled the discharge of over 800,000 cubic meters of treated cyanide water and 100,000 cubic meters of treated contact water, and have ensured that the water storage ponds remain below capacity. Another key component to the response efforts is improving the stability of the heap leach facility and increasing safety on site. The receiver has taken many actions over the last year to improve safety on site, to investigate the integrity of the facility and improve the stability of the heap leach facility. So there's some shots of the heap leach facility looking up the Dublin Gulch Valley. The heap leach facility is on the foreground there, or the background there, and then on the right-hand side are the work that's currently occurring. So in June, recirculation of the heap leach facility was stopped. This action was made possible by the water management and water treatment efforts on site. And it supports the efforts to dewater the facility and improve the stability of the heap leach facility. To further improve the stability of the facility, the receiver has also installed a well into the in-heap pond that's behind the embankment, and this reduces the amount of contaminated water that overtops the pond. This well also enables the receiver to direct solution from the heap leach facility to the processing facility where gold is being extracted from the solution. Revenue from this extraction will be used to offset the public funds being spent on response efforts. Stabilization efforts are underway using both manned and remotely operated equipment, and will include the movement of approximately 300,000 tons of material away from the crest of the facility. These activities began this month and are the last of the planned construction activities for the season. Over the winter months, the receiver will continue to manage water and monitor conditions on and off site. The government of Yukon will continue to work closely with the receiver to ensure the necessary actions are taken on site to maintain physical and environmental stability. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. And now to our final speaker, Tyler Williams.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Tyler Williams, and I am a water resources scientist with Department of Environment's Water Resources Branch. I'm here today to provide an update on results of the water sampling program downstream of the Eagle Gold mine site. Monitoring of Haggart Creek has been ongoing, with over 3,000 water quality samples collected downstream since the heap leach failure in June 2024. With nearly daily sampling occurring, we can be confident that we understand the water quality conditions in Haggard Creek. Over the summer period, contaminant concentrations in the creek generally improved. This is in part due to the collection and storage of contaminated groundwater that is effectively averting contaminants from reaching the creek. During the past couple of months, when contaminants have been detected in the creek, they've been primarily caused by the treatment plant discharge as opposed to groundwater contamination. Cyanide and nitrite nitrogen are the two contaminants that pose the most risk to fish health. Drawing your attention to the screen, and we'll flip to the next slide, we can see how these two contaminant concentrations have changed since the start of the year. So we're looking at two graphs here, on top the WAD cyanide and on the bottom nitrite nitrogen. On the x-axis, we've got date from starting at January 1st until our most recent results on September 17th. And then concentrations plotted on the y-axis. The horizontal red dashed line there is the water quality objective, respectively, for those parameters. And the shaded periods in the background are times when the water treatment plant was discharging. So two primary things we can see. We're in Haggard Creek here, 2 kilometers downstream of where Dublin Gulch joins at this W29 station. So two primary things we can see from these graphs is, one, the period where the discharge plant was not discharging had much lower concentrations of contaminants. And this is an indication of what I referred to there, that the primary source of contaminants is now the water treatment plant discharge as opposed to a continuous groundwater source. And the second thing we can see is we have a consistent decline in concentrations over time. You can see particularly in the cyanide graph that it has fallen below the water quality objective and the concentrations have continued to go down over time. And this is a result of that groundwater process and also improvements to the water treatment process. So as shown in these graphs, WAD cyanide concentrations have mostly met water quality objectives since mid-May, while nitrite has begun to meet objectives over half the time since the end of August. Other contaminants, such as total copper, have mostly met objectives since mid-September, while mercury has been below detectable levels in the creek this summer. Cobalt remains the one contaminant that has consistently been above water quality objectives. Different contaminants behave differently over time, and while the cobalt results remain an indication that contaminated groundwater continues to reach the creek, it's encouraging to see the overall trend of less contaminants reaching Haggard Creek via groundwater. The Department of Environment will continue to report on water quality results, which are regularly published on yukon.ca. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Tyler. We'll now open the floor to questions, and we'll begin with the reporters in the room. Someone will bring you a mic, and please return it when you're finished asking your question. First person will be Gabrielle Plonka from CBC.
Hi, can you give us an update on fish? Have there been any more fish deaths, and is there any more data there that you can share?
First question is going to be, we've got our senior fisheries biologist, Cameron Sinclair, in the audience, so I will let him answer that one.
Hey everyone, Cameron Sinclair, Senior Fisheries Biologist with Environment. So as far as death of fish this year, there hasn't been any that have been observed. And as far as information on fish, I'll give a broad overview, but if you have any questions after that. So we repeated what we did last year with our fisheries assessments. We went to about 50 sites throughout the entire watershed to check on population, size of fish, distribution, species composition. And then we also installed, last year, if you had the reports online, but we tagged over 200 grayling with these little tags called passive integrated transponder, or PIT tags. So this year, what we did with our team with Natural Night Done was install several PIT tag arrays. So think of it like if you're on a highway, those highway markers, basically when a fish goes through that, it pings to see that the fish had passed that. So we put that at the bottom of Haggard Creek, as well as Lynx Creek and just above the confluence of Lynx Creek. And what that was done was to get the information of when grayling were coming into the system. So we see like the charts there of when the contaminants were high, is that a big concern, and are grayling in the system or not? And that we're just taking those out next week, hopefully to get the out migration of grayling in the fall. And the only other thing that happened with fish this year was the receiver with their consultants did put up several fish barriers. The first one was at the confluence of Haggard Creek in the South McQuestion. That one was designed to stop adult salmon if they were coming up there. There's been no salmon noted there, but allow grayling to go through into the system. And then we worked with the receiver and National Dunn over the spring and summertime to determine at what levels of those water quality objectives we should enact those barriers and potentially move fish throughout the summertime. And the numbers there were not at those lethal levels because it takes about a week or so to get that as things are rising. There were some salvages, and they were just, instead of last year being moved out of the system, moved up further as basically help the grayling come up in their migration. And we'll have our yearly report on that, same as last year, sometime in the spring 2026.
Both. We'll now move on to Dana Hatherley from Yukon News.
Okay, how much royalty from Eagle Gold Mine has gone to the Yukon government?
Thanks. I'll start the answer, Dana, and I'll pass it over to Aaron to provide possibly more detail. So over the last 2 years of collection, 2021 and 2023, we got $8.2 million. And there's still a $1.6 million which is outstanding. And I've asked the department, the royalty information is in process, but I've asked them to get it up online, so for everybody here. And why don't I stop there and see if Aaron wants to add more information about any other details.
I think you've got it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Both. Next, we'll move on to Macklin Link from CKRW.
Great. I think my question is probably best suited for Minister Stryker, but obviously it's been a year since PwC took over, I guess, working on the site. How would you characterize how they've handled the remediation work? Yeah,
and I did comment on it a little bit, Macklin, but let me talk about it, and let me build on Tyler's conversation about fish. And the whole goal here was to try and reduce risk. First of all, health and safety risk, and second of all, environmental risk. So from the health and safety side, the first thing that PricewaterhouseCoopers, did was they built a safety berm, because if you look at those maps that Aaron was showing, all that slide was coming down, and below that is a control pond, and below that is a camp. And there was risk of secondary slides happening, especially at freshet. So we needed there to be a safety berm put in place. That happened. Then the next thing that happens is you can start to put groundwater wells just below it because you're right in the gulch, and that's to intercept the groundwater. Because when the heap had the slide, it came out of containment. It came from where it was on a lined surface to where it's just on the ground. And then contaminated water started to move into the groundwater. So while the issues that Tyler was talking about, how when they're treating water, they're discharging that treated water, there's still some level of contaminant in it. What we're also doing, though, is reducing the long-term risk, because we're taking that groundwater and pulling it up. If we didn't, then that cyanide would slowly move toward the creek. And once it's in the creek, it's very difficult for us to do anything about it. And then it could be a serious problem, as Cameron was talking about with fish. And then you caught earlier when Aaron talked about that the receiver has now they've been regrading the slide area so that they're getting rid of those steep slopes, so they're reducing risk. And now they're able to get on there, and they've gone down into where the old, what's the embankment? Is it just called the embankment? So like think of the bottom of the heap used to have this little in-the-ground pond, and that's where they collected all of the cyanide water. But what's been happening over the past year and 3 months and year since PricewaterhouseCoopers has been in there, that water's been coming down, then coming up over that embankment and then contacting the ground again. So the problem just continues to persist. And then we have to go back into this thing where we're pumping that water up because we don't want it to slowly move towards Haggart Creek. But now that that well has been put into the pond that's just behind the embankment, they can stop that whole process. So that water now can stay in containment. They then pump it out right there. They then move it into the treatment facilities and they deal with it. So they've done everything we wanted them to do. And I noted in my opening comments, like we were really nervous around freshet because if it had been a rough snow year, suddenly you could get all of those ponds, which are trying to hold all that water back, could have been overwhelmed. So like all of the hard work that everyone did was good, and that's led by PricewaterhouseCoopers. And then finally, they're now in the process of going through a sale and investment solicitation process. So that process is ongoing, and so we're, you know, you never have to go to court and bring in a receiver to deal with the environmental remediation. But we're so happy that I think that the environmental outcomes would have been much, much worse had we not brought the receiver in. And in particular, Eagle Gold had indicated when they were in the courts that they would look to file for bankruptcy protection, which means that they weren't indicating that they had the money to do this. Okay, so it was important that we stepped in.
Thank you both. We'll move on to Gwen from Lower Boreal.
I would like to know, with the upcoming elections, how will the project be handed over, and what are your expectations and perhaps your hopes?
OK. En anglais ou en français, ou les deux?
Les deux.
Les deux, OK. Je vais essayer en français, mais pour moi, j'espère que le travail continue avec l'équipe. On n'a pas besoin d'une personne comme une politicienne en ce moment. C'est besoin de les groupes comme le groupe d'énergie, mines et ressources et le groupe d'environnement, même le groupe de Natchanakdan, la Première Nation de Natchanakdan, même le groupe de la réservoir continue. Et en ce moment, c'est peut-être les trois choses. Ça continue avec les examens, les tests pour la qualité de l'eau. Aussi, le travail sur la face de mine. I don't know how to say the hill, but that stuff. And then there's also, c'est aussi le travail de peut-être un groupe de mines qui va acheter le mine. Et tout ça continue. So I'll try it in English, and I apologize for my French. We hope that the coming election has no impact on the work that's there. The teams are in place. Their work is to continue, and it doesn't matter whether that's the Department of Environment doing all of the tests, working with Natchanakdan, Department of Energy, Mines and Resources, working with the receiver to do all of the work on site. And the receiver is also looking in a forward-facing way about how to go through a sales and investment solicitation process. That's about how the receiver comes away from the site at that point, and that through the sale, we deal with the money that we have loaned for getting this remediation work in place. So just as a reminder for folks, the money to date for the receivership, we've used the bond, $105 million, and a loan, I think we're currently at $70 million. When we were in the Assembly this spring, we agreed that it could go to a total of $115 million. We actually think that it will use only 105 up to the end of this calendar year, because there have been some savings on site, and so that's reduced the amount of money that we need to put forward to advance the receivership. So that's good, and the mine is now mostly using, or the receiver is mostly using, like, they've sold off core assets. For example, they had investments in other projects. Well, they've withdrawn those investments so that they can pay towards the receivership. And there was originally, when they came in, there were bank accounts and there was gold on site. So that will pay for most of the work coming up to the end of this calendar year. And I think, as Aaron alluded to, now that they're going in and pumping from just at the bottom of the heap, they're going to pull that cyanide concentrate out, and they're going to treat it. They're going to treat it through it's called the ADR. I don't even know what that stands for, guys, but it's where they will draw the gold from it first and then put it through the treatment plant. And then that gold will help contribute to paying for the costs of the receivership.
Thank you both. It looks like we don't have any reporters online today, so we have time for another round of questions in the room. I'll go back to Gabrielle if you have a follow-up question.
Thanks. Do we have any details on the larger rivers, the Stewart or the Yukon?
The water quality data in those rivers, yeah. The furthest downstream monitoring is the South McQuestion River, just after Haggard Creek enters it. And we can look at that data and see what impacts there are there, which are certainly far less than is in Haggard Creek, right? It's a bigger river, you have more dilution. Certainly we've seen some increases in concentrations of cobalt, for instance, that could be attributed to what's happening in Haggard Creek. Yeah, from that, the effects have not been significant into the South McQuestion River. And when you consider the size of further downstream rivers from there, you wouldn't expect to be able to detect any impact in those larger rivers. So we can infer that from what we see in the South McQuestion.
Can you talk about, it goes South McQuestion, is it the Pelly? Maybe just help them to know what's all in the chain.
Yeah, I gotta get this right though.
Yeah. Well, we'll work. Surely we'll all know it together.
Haggard, South McQuestion, Stewart, Yukon River. Yes.
And also, Gabrielle, like when this happened, we reached out to Commissioner Vincent LeMay from Alaska and the downriver nations to talk about what was happening, and we've made a commitment to informing them as well.
Thank you. It looks like we do have one online question from Ashley Janau from the Canadian Press.
Hi, I think this is probably for Aaron. If I heard right, you mentioned that this month a lot of stabilization work has started. I'm wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about what specifically is being done as far as that goes.
So right now, the focus of the receiver is pulling back material from the scarp, the failure zones, where there's that kind of vertical area where the heap leach failed. So they're pulling back the material from there and placing it further back on the facility to reduce those pressures. And then they'll begin to re-slope that area to stabilize that. And so that's the primary focus right now.
And just as a follow-up question for the minister, I believe one of the first deadlines for the sale for bids was like 10 days ago or something like that. I'm wondering if the government has gotten any sort of update on the sale process and how many people are interested at this point and how that's all going.
Yeah, I don't have details, Ashley, and I think that That process is being led by our folks from economic development, not by energy, mines, and resources. I know that they have moved from the first phase to the second phase, but I don't have information for you today about what that looked like. But overall, how it's been described to me is that the process is moving as expected.
Thank you, Ashley. We'll come back into the room. And Dana, do you have a follow-up question?
So with regards to the royalty sale process, if you're familiar with that, what are the royalties referring to in this case, and why aren't the royalties going to the Yukon government? There's a royalty sale process post on the PwC website for Victoria Gold, and I've reached out about it, but I don't have much information.
You know, earlier when I was talking about non-core assets, and I said there are projects, for example, that Victoria Gold had invested in. So one of them, for example, is Banyan Gold. So Victoria Gold had invested in Banyan Gold, and then Victoria Gold, the receiver, worked with Banyan to relinquish those assets and bring the money back in to pay for the remediation work at the site. So that's what they're talking about with those royalties. They're probably, I'd have to look up those arrangements, but there would have been royalty clauses within those agreements. That's very separate from the royalties that I was speaking about earlier, Dana, which are royalties that Victoria Gold owes to the Yukon around their gold that was mined on site. Anyway, and there were several projects. Like if I look at sorry, and I don't have a specific breakdown, but I think that the non-core assets yielded tens of millions of dollars. The total of all of that money is 62, but that includes the original gold that was on site, both sitting on a shelf and sitting processed inside of the ADR. That includes bank accounts, that includes some interest. So the $62 million has that whole wrap up. I can work to try and get you more information about which portion of that has to do with the non-core asset sales and which portion of that has to do with the projects that had some royalty clauses in them.
Thank you. Macklin, do you have a follow-up question? Gwen, do you have a follow-up question?
Ashley have one?
Does Ashley have another question? Sorry. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day. That brings us to the end of our tech briefing.